All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. This session is called TestStand Result Processing Plugins. And we're going to talk about what result processing plugins are, how they work, and also go over how you make one. So just to start off, we have a slide for our giants are female. And I chose to highlight Dr. Vivian Chu. She's the co-founder and CTO of Diligent Robotics, and she has a PhD from Georgia Tech. She's the principal designer and engineer for Moxie, who is it's an autonomous nursing care assistant robot. So it's so awesome. It navigates hospital corridors autonomously, and it can be given instructions from nurses to take care of a lot of tasks that normally nurses have to take care of, but really they don't have time to do. They can pick up medications, it can find wheelchairs, it can get supplies, stuff like that. And it's a huge help to the hospitals it's been installed in.
Can they see our screen?
Yeah, I think so. Can you see our screen, everybody? Yeah, okay, they say yes. Good, perfect. Yep. And one of the quotes from her company, Diligent Robotics, that I really like, is they say, "What we're doing isn't easy, but nothing worth doing ever is." And so this is somebody who is a leader in the tech space, is a huge innovator, and I'm excited to see where they go with their products and their company. So, all right. So getting to the session itself, again, the first topic we're going to discuss is what is result processing and what is a plugin in TestStand. Then we're actually going to go through creating a TestStand plugin. And then talk about the details of plugins themselves, talking about plugin entry points, and then talk about some implementation details, gotchas, pitfalls, things to think about. And then we're going to lastly talk about deployments. In between all of this, we're also going to be doing a couple demos, which Sam will be driving for, so you get to see the great one at work in TestStand. So result processing plugins. So the purpose of result processing plugins in TestStand is that TestStand is primarily used to sequence through tests that you have. But one of its other main purposes is also to collect those results, process them, and then put them into reports or into databases or other places where you want to have your data stored. And so TestStand has a plugin architecture for these report plugins, so you can have any number actually of plugins in TestStand that can produce custom reports or log to databases or to data structures, data travelers, what have you, which can be very useful for integrating your test automation software into a larger framework or a process. So the result processing plugins, they process test results. It generates reports and also logs data to storage. So specifically about a result processor, right? Again, you see you have your main sequence on the right-hand side or your client file that gathers the results, and the main sequence passes that result list to your process model, which then invokes the plugins that actually process those results. A plugin in and of itself is just a sequence file, as are with a lot of things in TestStand, right? You have process models, which are just sequence files, right? A result processing plugin is also just a sequence file, but it has this special type of model. And we'll go into a little bit more about why that's important. But one of the things that makes it unique is that it is of the model type. And process or plugin entry or plugins, result processing plugins contain plugin entry points. And these plugin entry points are another thing that make these plugins unique. And these are all standard things, plugins, entry points that are named. And so they're all result processing plugins share a set of predefined entry points. And these predefined entry points are listed up here, as you can see. And they all have to be named the same way because that is how the process model knows to invoke these sequences that are in this result processing plugin sequence file.
Do they have any questions, or have we seen any? No.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, just let us know in the chat. We'll try to address them as we go.
Yeah.
All right. So next, plugins also contain specific data types, and these specific data types come along with your result processing plugin. And we highly recommend that when you're creating a result processing plugin, and we'll show this later, that you use TestStand's automatic scripting tool that they have in order to generate your result processing plugin templates, which will create these data types for you and populate them in your plugin entry points, in your parameters and local variables and stuff where you need them to be. And then lastly, plugins have to live in a very specific location in order to work. Technically, there are 4 locations in which you can have your result processing plugin. They're in the TestStand components, models, model plugins, or in the subfolder add-ons, or in TestStand public components, models, model plugins, and then in the subfolder add-ons in TestStand public. And so technically there's 4 places where they can reside where TestStand will be able to find them and actually use them. We highly recommend that they go into the TestStand public folder, components, models, model plugins. And so if you see on the bottom image on the screen, there is a sequence file that's a CSV report generator. This is the directory which this is the level at which we recommend you put your result processing plugins, because when they're located in here, this tells TestStand that this is a configurable model plugin. And so when you open up your configure result processing window, it shows up in that list where you have the checkboxes where you can enable or disable them. If they're inside the add-ons folder, the subdirectory down below, what that tells TestStand is this is a plugin that I want you to globally enable forever and not give anybody the option to enable or disable. So there are times in which you want to do that, but in general, our recommendation is that you make it configurable, and then you can deploy your result processing config file with your processing plugin to make all your test stations the same. As far as putting the plugins into the TestStand, the program files folders, that's against one of the 10 commandments of TestStand, which Sam will be going over in a few hours in his presentation. But we really don't want to be messing with the program files directories of TestStand. That's why the TestStand public folder exists, and they're there so that you can customize them with your specific components.
Cool. Any questions?
Yeah. So before we move on, if there are any questions, I'll just take a minute and allow people to gather their thoughts.
Not even peanut gallery comments.
Nope, just a bunch of yeses and thumbs up. So this audience is very, very encouraging, which I appreciate.
Nice. All right.
All right. So creating a new plugin. Let's dive into it. So these are the kind of a step-by-step tutorial on how to create a new plugin. It's actually really straightforward. And after we go through these steps, then Sam is going to actually go through these steps on TestStand and show how it's done. So the first thing you do is you click on Configure in the TestStand sequence editor, and then click on Result Processing. At the bottom left of the Result Processing window that shows up, there's a checkbox that says Show More Options. If you click on that, then you'll be able to see some more of these options you see on the right-hand side of that window, including the Advanced button. When you click on the Advanced button, it opens the Advanced Options dialog, and that is where you'll be able to actually click on the Create Process Model plugin button that's available to you. And so it says here you have your advanced result processing settings, and then there's a button Create New Process Model plugin. So once you click on that, then it'll open up a file dialog where you can actually navigate to where you want your process model to exist. And again, we recommend that you go to your TestStand public folder into components, models, model plugins. And then we want, this is where you'll name your custom result processing plugin. So just to pause here, lessons learned when doing this, naming convention is very important, especially at this step in the generation of your custom result processing plugin, because when you name this and you press save, TestStand will automatically jump into scripting your entire result processing plugin sequence file, including creating a bunch of custom data types and creating all the parameters that your plugin will need for all of the plugin
entry points.
The plugin entry points, right? And so if you name it something and then decide later that you want to change it, it's really hard to change, because not only will you have to change the name of the result processing plugin sequence file, but you have to change the names of all of the custom data types and all the parameters in all the plugin entry points, and that's a huge headache. So we just want to put that out there. Think about what you are wanting to name it, because this name is going to be propagated to all those types and parameters. This Conrad says he's getting no video or audio. Says, I'm betting it's a me issue, just don't know what. Do we have any moderators in here that can maybe take him aside and helping him? Okay. Yeah, other people are saying they're fine. So, yeah.
Sorry, Conrad. It is Conrad. You issue.
All right. So once you named it and create your custom process model, it'll just do a whole bunch of scripting for you. And then the last thing you need to do is just cancel out of all the dialogues. So we're going to do a demo to create a plugin, and Sam's going to go through these steps that we just did and show you how to create a custom plugin.
Everything I have open.
Yeah.
All right. So when you go to configure result processing, this will pull up your result processing window. Check the show more options, click advanced, and you will see this dialog, which also has all your on-the-fly settings, which we'll talk about later. But right down here hidden is this little button. By the way, if you're ever in TestStand and you see this help button, this is probably the best tip you can walk away from this whole presentation with. Use that help button. I personally, and Jason will harp on this later, think TestStand help is really good. So you click on this button, it'll ask you where you want to put it. It automatically goes to where it should be, which is in your TestStand public folder. And we're just going to put it right in there. Don't put it anywhere else. That's a bad idea, as Jason pointed out. And do we want to do TestRact or Acme or GLA? What do we want to do? We'll call it GLA. Nice. And then we'll call it CSV demo. And it's always nice to put plugin in the name, just so when people see it on file or in a payload somewhere inside of a package or something, they know, oh, this is a plugin for TestStand. So that's another thing I would recommend doing, is always put plugin in there somewhere. So we ready?
Mm-hmm.
You good with that, Jason? Here's the dialog that says, okay, we've created these data types in there. Hit OK. Can cancel out of here now. And you can cancel out of here for now. We'll show you how to set it up later after we get everything ironed out. And it's really just that simple.
Yeah, so there's the custom report plugin that Sam created. So it's really simple to make one. And as you are probably suspecting, the devil is in the details, which we're about to get into with custom result processing plugins.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So as we mentioned before, one of the things that is unique about these custom process models is that they have these things called plugin entry points. And there's a lot of them, but what we've gone ahead and done is identified and highlighted really the ones that we found are the ones that are most often interacted with, right? So these are the most common entry points that are modified. Most of the other ones you may find a reason to use, but in general, you don't really need to use them. And these are the ones that really matter. Lessons learned as well. Use the TestStand help. Again, what Sam mentioned earlier, the TestStand help.
Show them where that is in the help.
Sure. Yeah.
If you go into the TestStand help, you can search for plugins here. Oops, you got to spell it right. And then look under down under entry points. And this shows you all the entry points, and you can click on them. It will show you information. It kind of shows you where they get called, within the 3 out-of-the-box process models too. So kind of the order they get called in and different things like that. So
yeah,
good information to know.
Yeah, and of the software products that I've used, including development environments and stuff like that, TestStand's help documentation is really excellent. It's very thorough, and like almost everything that I've ever needed to look up in TestStand has been found somewhere in the TestStand help, which is, really great. And so again, we'll harp on use the TestStand help. It's very thorough, and even with these custom report processing plugins, it shows you and explains to you what each of these plugin entry points are for, when they got called, what they're typically used for, etc. Another one is use out-of-the-box plugins for examples. TestStand ships with 3, which I'm sure most of us are pretty familiar with. But if you look at those out-of-the-box plugins, you can see how National Instruments, or Emerson now, has set up these report processing plugins, and you can see what kinds of things are implemented where, which is very helpful. So the first one we're going to talk about is configure standard options. And so if we'll pay attention to the right-hand side of the slide right now, at the top, it shows a little clip of the result processing options dialog where it says, configure result processing. This is the window that shows up. And typically when you are configuring, the generic NI report generation plugin, you click on that button and it pops open the report options dialog. And what is actually happening on the back end is that when that button is being clicked, this model plugin, configure standard options, is what's being called. And so if you want to have your own custom dialog that allows users to set report options like report formats and names and things like that, right? You can make your own pop-up and then put it inside of this configure standard options model plugin. And when your users or developers are going into the report processing configuration window and they click on that button, that's when it'll be popped up and available to you or to them to interact with those configuration settings.
Questions about that one? No? Our chat's looking good.
Yeah, they seem happy or asleep, either one. All right, so the next one is model plugin initialize. So this is the one that's used to initialize the plugin when execution begins. This is a great time for model callbacks. And so if you have model callbacks that you've configured and you want those settings to be able to be perpetuated into your plugin, this is a great place to do those things in the initialize the plugin entry point. Next is begin. And so this can be a little bit confusing. What's the difference between initialize and begin? They execute very close to each other, but they're separated because we want to make sure that we're doing specific things in each one. Initialize is more for configurations and settings and things like that. And begin is kind of the setup section for your result processing plugin. And so here and if you look at the TestStand help, it says this, it's meant for opening file and database references, especially if you're using on the fly. If you're not using on the fly, then you probably don't need to actually use this or to open file and database references, because you'll typically do that at UUT done, where you take the result list, process the result list, and then you open up your file, write everything to it, or your database, write everything to it, and then close afterwards. But if you're using on the fly, this is where you will open your references so that you don't open and close them constantly when results become available or when your on-the-fly reporting plugin executes.
Actually, I thought of this case between when we talked about it. So because begin happens outside of your UT loop, if you're processing like parts, like 100 parts a second or a minute or whatever, this is good to use because then you only have to create one connection to the database and it doesn't have to do it every iteration of your UUT. Does that make sense?
Oh, so even with on the fly.
Even without on the fly.
Even without on the fly, yeah.
I mean, granted, it's still running asynchronously, but it can
bog things down.
Yeah, it can bog things down if you have to open the database every time you run a dot through there and you run hundreds of parts a second. So
So Kevin's asking, is the report plugin asynchronous or static/blocking?
You can choose.
Yep, and we can show you that later.
Yep, we'll show you where that is.
Yeah. Good question. Thanks, Kevin. You're the man.
If we don't answer it, yell at us later.
Yeah. Miss you, Kevin. All right. So UUT done. So this is the next one. And this is typically where the sausage gets made. This is the meat and potatoes of your result processing plugin. This handles all the results after the main sequence and generates the full report. So if you're not doing on-the-fly stuff, this is really where the traversal of the result lists array and tree will happen, right? Recursing through that to find your results, and then formatting things, and then actually writing to the report all happens in UUT done. Yeah. And then lastly is end. You close all your sessions and you run any completion routines, essentially the cleanup section of your report processing plugin here.
All right.
All right, so the last one we'll talk about is on the fly. So this one comes with the most caveats and stars attached to it, right? This is the hardest one to implement. This occurs using on the fly settings. And so the on the fly settings are the ones that you see in the bottom right-hand corner here, where it says advanced result processing options. So Sam's going to show us here. We go to advanced. And so the on the fly settings right here in your advanced result processing settings, these are what control how often this plugin entry point gets called. And so you can either set it up to be at a processing interval at a certain number of seconds or a certain number of results. If you want your result processing plugins on the fly step results entry point to execute after every single result, you set that bottom number to 1. And then every time a result becomes available, then it'll run, and then it'll be able to grab your reports. Or if you have a lot of results that are coming out at once and you want to batch things up, this is where you can change those settings.
Cool.
All right, so continuing on, point 3 on here is you really have to be careful about optimizing the code that goes in here. Because you can configure it to run after every single result becomes available, if you have anything that even takes a little bit of time to run, you can really bog down your process if you're not careful. So this is something you want to optimize, and also consider batching your result processing on the fly if there are some processes that are unavoidable that take up time.
Yeah, but it will be ran asynchronously if you choose that setting. So yeah, okay.
Yeah. On the fly is typically used for very long runs that contain lots of data because with the next point, it keeps memory lower because it processes results as they become available, instead of having TestStand hold everything in an ever-increasing large array and then dumping it all into a report or into a database at the very end. One of the caveats about using on the fly is you do have to be really careful about where in the stack things are happening. And that's something you have to be aware of, and your code that you put in here has to be aware of in order for you to be able to extract the proper things out of the stack, out of the result list, things like that. Another good thing to do is when you make a result processing plugin, you have given to you an array of per socket runtime variables. And this is something that TestStand generates for you automatically. And these are very useful, that allow you to have these variables that are scoped to each of your sockets, so that you don't have cross, contamination, I guess. I can't think of a better word on the spot.
That's a good word.
Of variables or data or anything in between calls of your on-the-fly step results. Because if you have multiple sockets running in parallel and you have on-the-fly reporting, that can get very messy. Unless you can sequester some of your memory space. And the way we found that's most effective to do that is to use these per socket variables that are made available to you from TestStand.
Yep.
All right, any questions about on the fly? Okay. If you do have any questions, just pop them in whenever as well, and when we come to a stopping point, we'll address them. All right. So optional. So after you've implemented your code, your sequences, right, your plugin entry points, there's going to be a lot of them that are in your custom result processing plugin that you're not using. And what we recommend is, one, do not delete these entry points. They're really hard to get back due to custom data types and the parameters. And so you have these custom data types, and then you have these parameters that are set up with the custom data types specific to your custom result processing plugin, that if you delete these sequences, even if you recreate a sequence and name it the same thing, it's not going to have those same parameters already set up for you. And you just have to have a perfect memory and know how they were all set up, right? Or else you're kind of hosed.
And you can't go copy it from another existing plugin because the data types are different.
Yeah. So yeah, don't delete them. Instead, what we recommend is putting an X before the name of the entry point, which basically namespaces it away from TestStand. And because they're not named the same anymore, TestStand just doesn't think they exist, and therefore they won't execute. So the last point here is, if you do not rename these unused entry points, TestStand will find them when it's executing your result processing plugins and then execute them. And even though they're not doing anything, they'll still get executed, and it'll slow down TestStand. It slows it down by microseconds, but still, it's a performance hit that you can easily avoid by just renaming them simply by sticking an X in the front. All right, so now we're going to do a demo for plugin entry points with fantastic Sam here.
We're just going to rename the ones we're not going to use. I usually do this right when I create my entry points, just so I don't forget later. And it's not a big deal if you don't rename them. TestStand will still call them, and most of the time nothing's happening in there. But sometimes it is, so it just depends on what your need is. We're not going to do on the fly in here, but
yeah, and it's just good to have them there, because in the future, right, you may want to actually put something in one of these other plugin entry points, and if you have it deleted, then you're kind of up the creek with trying to recreate that thing. So just leave them disabled with that little X there, and it'll work out just fine. Matthias says that's a good recommendation. Good job, Sam.
Thanks, Matthias.
All right, so now we're going to go into the practical side, where we're going to actually implement this plugin. And after each one of these slides that we have, Sam is going to actually hop over into TestStand and show you exactly what we're doing here. So this is actually 6 steps right here. It's our 6-part program for you to be able to implement your own plugin. And so the goal of this little exercise we have here is to implement a CSV report plugin, and following these 6 steps. So step 1 is figure out the data and your icon. And so what you want to do is figure out any data types, and specifically think about the options you want to be available to users of your result processing plugin, and make those data types. And there's a specific part or structure in your parameters that are generated by TestStand when you make your result processing plugin that allows you to create these data types and add them in. And once you add them in into that structure, those variables in TestStand, TestStand will automatically generate those variables in your result processing.cfg file, and allow you to load those settings in, or those configurations in, automatically for you. And so it's really nice that they provide that for you already. Another thing you want to do is define an icon. Icons for the result processing window here are 16 by 16, and they have to be in the directory, public documents or your TestStand public directory components icons. And you want to make this icon and put it into that directory before you launch TestStand. If you don't, TestStand only reads the things in that folder on startup. And so if you create that icon later, TestStand won't believe it exists there until you restart TestStand.
Okay.
Next thing you want to do is set your default values for your base options, and then set any special values for your result processing dialog.
Okay, so let's do this. I think the first thing you need to do before you dive into this is figure out what kind of options you need for your plugin. Where ours is just a simple CSV file, the only option we really need is a folder location of where to put the reports. At least that's what we're going to choose for this. Now, if you go into like one of the out-of-the-box ones and you look at the options they have for them, it's massive data types that they're storing a bunch of different, settings in there for their options. For ours, it's pretty simple. It's just like, hey, we just care where the folder is going to go, and that's it. And so what we need to do is we need to go change the type. By the way, I'm using the old school TestStand 2019. I haven't bought into the whitewashed version yet.
You're just saving your retinas for later.
I am saving my retinas for later. Hint, hint, Emerson. We do use a lot of newer versions of TestStand around here. I didn't have it installed right away. So we can go into our type definition. I don't know exactly what this window is called. Types.
Yeah, so the type window.
And you should see your data types that got set up here with your GLA summit and all that stuff, right? And so this options one is the one that we need to do. And so we need to give it a data type of, I think we just need a path. Yeah, okay. So we're just going to add a field, and it's going to be a string, and we're just going to call that, let me see what I want to call it real quick. Hold on. If I don't call it the right thing, I got to change a whole bunch of crap. So let me report folder is what it's called. Okay. No. So I'm going to change that to report folder. And that's, I think, all we really need in here in the options. So I'm going to save that. It's going to increment the type version. This is one of the few times where it's okay to accept type versions. Don't ever do that with the out-of-the-box type, by the way. That's one of the 10 commandments, too, you're going to learn about later. So, okay. So we've got our plugin options now with that filled in it. And you can come change this later. It doesn't, if you need to add more options later, that's fine, because it's in a data type. So what we do next, and I got my TestStand laid out where I have my sequences here, my steps in the middle, and then my types over here, is we go when you create your plugin, you have this model plugin components description here. And inside of here is your default values. And so what you want to do is this plugin specific options. You want to set this to a default value, meaning I always want this to go to C / reports. Okay, just by default. That means if they don't ever click options, you don't need the quotes around that. If they don't ever click on the options, by default, it's going to get put into that folder. Okay. And so that's key, is to set up these default options in such a way that if they never set up the options, it would still run and work. Okay. Are there any questions around that in the chat? No.
No.
Okay.
Georgios is just saying you should switch. Newer versions of TestStand has other improvements worth sacrificing your retinas for. And I was telling him, oh yeah, we do use newer versions. We do. Yeah, we just like to joke about it.
I just don't code a lot because I'm now more in management, so I'm lazier. All right, so the next thing is you come down into this base, and this base object inside of here is pretty important because it contains a lot of the metadata around your plugin. So for example, what goes in here, what goes in here, what shows on displays, the ability to enable and disable, the ability to do new threads, all of that stuff is defined in this base. If those things aren't set, you won't see those options or can't change those options in that window that I was just looking at. And so typically you're going to leave them default, but the one that I like to change is this one right here, the options description. So we'll just call that a cool GLA plugin. All right. And then other things I like to change is like your display name, expression. And this can be an expression, meaning you can pull this from variables if you want to, like get who the user is. So if you wanted to do, engine.current user or whatever, you can put that in there, but we'll just put GLA CSV plugin here. And the other one that we want to change is the icon. Now we got to go get an icon. Do we have a tester hacked one? Do these have 16? Jason, do you know if these have 16 by 16 in them?
I don't.
We probably should.
For the test track icons, we should make some. Yeah.
Yeah, we should have one. Where's that stopwatch at? Oh, it's not in there. It's in the chat, huh?
Yeah.
I don't have that open. I don't want to open that.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll just grab an icon here, a random one. We'll grab a TestStand one. How about that? I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go to the folder where it should be. And okay, yeah. So we'll go instruments TestStand. You want to put this in that public folder. So you want to go to public and components and icons, I believe. And you want to place that right in there. Okay. It's going to look like that. That's a funny icon. And we'll just call it GLA. Doesn't matter. That's not the GLA icon, but close enough. I'm going to grab the name. It doesn't matter what you call it, what it looks like, anything like that. Once you get it to where you want it. Then the thing that matters is that you have the icon name right here, and that the icon exists in this folder, and it has a 16 by 16 size inside of it. Icons are made up of multiple sizes if you're not familiar. So, okay, we're good.
Yep. Sam, that's close enough, Roundy. Coming up with nicknames for you.
That's okay. Been called worse things by worse people. All right. Anything else that we want to look at inside of here? If you're doing it on the fly, you got to change that to true. We don't have time in this presentation to get into all of this stuff. You could change the run order. I think you can go see what that means, but I think it means the priority level that it puts it on in terms of
which plugins get run in which order.
Yeah. So cool. Oh, new thread. We'll change that to true. Kevin asked about that, but you want that to be true so that they can change it. Okay.
So just again to point out, Kevin Shirey asked earlier if report plugins are asynchronous or static/blocking, and this is how you can make it asynchronous by saying.
Well, this is how you can enable that option.
Right.
To make it asynchronous.
To make it asynchronous.
You still have to change the option in your setting in there. So.
Oh, okay. So this is part 1 of 2 to that answer.
All right. So now we have to restart TestStand because of that icon issue, right? So I'm going to close it out. And then I think you can start talking about the next thing while that's going.
Yeah. So now we want to make our options dialog. And so one of the things, if you're using LabVIEW to make this dialog, use the TestStand modal VIs, and you can see there's a screenshot at the bottom saying, TestStand start modal dialog VI and modal dialog VI. And so all you have to do is feed in your sequence context into these VIs, and it will make a modal dialog window, but it's only modal to TestStand instead of being modal to your instance of LabVIEW or whatever. And this just makes it a lot cleaner and ties it to your TestStand execution. Another thing you want to do inside your options dialog is read from parameters.options to be able to read in those options that are your default options for your plugin, which are going to be loaded from your result processing configuration file. If you write changes to parameters.options, through the user interface, people click things, change file paths or whatever. You want to write to parameters.options. There's also a parameters.changed that you want to to toggle as well when parameters have been changed, just to tell TestStand that something has been changed. And that's what you do inside of your options dialog. And again, this is when you can have that option to set your result processing plugin to run asynchronously, right?
We're running short on time, aren't we? A little bit.
We've got 4 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, and we're not going to get through all this.
Well, we have 4 minutes until 1:45, which is the end of our presentation time, and then we have 10 minutes afterwards for questions.
Okay, so it has a dialog already in there. You want to delete that, and then you want to where is it?
Folder dialog.
Yeah, these are locals that I have, and these are things that I have. Okay. So what's happening with these steps is this one is calling into the engine dialog, and all it does is allow them to browse for a path. And then if they have a valid path, what it does is it comes in here and it sets that parameters.change to true. And it also sets parameters.modelplugin.plugin-specific.options.report folder equal to local.path0, which is where that path, that folder that they browse to is located. One thing that I used to do early on when I was making plugins is I would try and do my own options in here. You don't have to. When TestStand kicks this up, it goes and pulls from your result config file all the options, passes them to you through this parameter. So you'll have the existing options, and then you just change them and send them back. So, okay.
All right. So then we have implementing initialize and begin. So again, the initialize is where you will handle options and configurations, and where you also handle your model callbacks from your client file or your main sequence, your sequence file that's running your top level test or sequence. And then this is where you can also handle model plugin configuration as well. We don't have a lot of examples of this in our demo that we've got here, but we will be doing a model or a.
Actually, with time, we're just not. We're gonna skip this one.
Okay, we're gonna skip that one. Okay, never mind. Sorry.
That's fine. Go look at the out of the box plugin and see what they're using it for with the callbacks. So.
The configure model options.
Yeah.
Or the model options callback. All right, so then you move into implementing your result processing core. And so this is where you're going to parse your main sequence results or your result list that comes back from your TestStand main sequence. You'll want to make sure you pay attention to information and parameters.uut and parameters.uut status, because this is where all of your information that's pertinent to your test is going to be coming from, like serial numbers, things like that for your UUT that you'll probably want to include into your report. And then also this is where you'll be, recursing through your result list and grabbing data and formatting it, and then actually writing it to your file. And so for lessons learned for this, you want to consider all step types. And so when you're looking at your result list, the results actually have kind of different structures depending on what kind of step type it is, especially with the test result steps, right? A multiple numeric limit test step result will look very different than even just a numeric test limit result. And you'll have to access different struct members in order to get the data that you're looking for. And so you'll want to make the code in here aware of the different step types, and also write code that will handle different step types that your result processing plugin is going to encounter. You also want to consider UI messages, and then again, make sure you use your per socket variables. And it's always handy to have a library or something that will be able to recurse through your result list as well, because it can be tricky to grab the results that you're looking for out of that tree, because you have multiple nested results that, depending on where your results get pushed into the tree during your execution, depending on.
Muted. Okay. Add results is basically, this is where the recursion takes place. And so what I do is inside of done, I will pass in the tree of the results, and it will just go through them. Ignore that. I don't know why that got copied in there. And then you'll see that anytime it encounters a sequence, like a new sequence in the tree, it just hands that off and recurses on itself. And so when it gets to the end, it won't do that. So what it's doing is these cases are handling each of the different major step types, the test step types. And then there's one for just generic any step. And then if it's a sequence call, it passes that off into here and then recurses back down through it. So again, we're kind of low on time, so I want to be careful. This one is just using a Windows function to write the
MS Core Lib.
MS Core Lib, just to write that file when we're done with it. So what we're going to do in our UUT done is we're going to have all of these steps here. By the way, if you don't use these templates, they're awesome. And so basically, we're going to add the serial number, we're going to add the final result status, a timestamp, the operator, the station ID, and these all come from parameters that are being passed into this entry point, whether they're in the UUT type or in the UUT status here. And then you have a reference to your main sequence results, and that's what we're going to take and pass into this subsequence that I already went through. Yeah, that's fine, because that won't exist at runtime. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, and so then at the end, what we're going to do is we're basically flattening out that result list and putting it in this results container here, or this results array, and then we'll take that and build it into this result string, and then we'll write the CSV file at the end. So questions?
Yeah, no questions.
Okay. Do we want to run the demo now?
Yeah.
I think that's really all we're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm actually going to go back to this TestStand folder and pull up the demo, because I love running with the demo because it exercises everything.
Okay.
So we'll go into National Instruments. Pretty soon that'll be called Emerson, right? And we'll go to examples, demos. No, we want this one. This is a great demo. If you ever want to test your plugins, use this demo. It exercises everything.
Somebody's asking if we have an example of the CSV file that this produces.
Yeah, I'm going to run it, and then we'll spit it out, and I'll show it to you.
Okay.
So the first thing I need to do is I need to come in and configure and put it in my result list. If you're not familiar with configurations, basically configurations are different sets of plugins that are turned on or off. And so I'm going to create a new configuration where I can test this. I'm going to add the GLA demo. Here's the report thing. I can throw that on the desktop and then create it in like a temp folder. And we'll make that our default thing. There's that term that you saw me put over in that base thing.
Text window.
Yep. And here's where you can choose to do in a new thread. This will run in a new thread, but it will still be stopping, meaning it will wait till it's done before you can start the next UT, or you can just hit no and it won't run in an asynchronous thread. It will run in the same thread. And so that's where that option is set. So hopefully that brought full circle for Kevin. So I hit OK. Now I should be able to run this. We'll see if we get any errors. We'll put in a GLA. Okay. That will suck if we get an error. Okay, so now we can go to our desktop in that temp folder. Here's the CSV report that we spit out. I forgot to tell you, I was basically naming the file with a serial number and then the timestamp, which is the date and just the seconds. And you could choose how you want to name your stuff. The world is the world's your oyster, right? Do we want to open with Excel? Let's open with just Notepad for now. So here's what it looks like inside of Notepad. CSV file with your serial number, your final result, your timestamp. It's not pretty, but it's also very, very simple code. So, and this is also why I like using that demo, because the string test, it tests every ASCII character, all 256 or whatever there are. So on the string tests. So.
Yeah, and it's one that you can compare what this report that's generated by the custom plugin looks like in comparison to one of the standard reports as well.
One of the out-of-the-box reports, yep. Gives you that baseline. So good point. Cool. One thing I should note is it doesn't show up here. There's a call, and again, we don't have a lot of time here, but there's a call that you can make into the engine that says load report. And once you call that, it will put that report in the viewer. So you got to call it on the report object. But there's documentation out there on how to do that. So
yeah. So real quick, going through the last few slides we have here. In the end is where you put your cleanup, your close your file handles, and database connections. And then again, we're not going to be demoing on the fly. Again, we're already way past time, but this is where you'll have to parse partial results. That's one of the things that makes on the fly confusing or tricky, because you won't have an entire result list. And then again, the advanced result processing settings is where you can set a time or a number of results that will kick off your result processing plugin. Okay, and then lastly, deployment. We recommend, it's optional, but we recommend that you deploy your result processing.cfg file separately. And this will allow you to preserve those options, right? That allow you to, choose which result processing plugins are enabled on a deployed machine, stuff like that. We recommend that you build code modules into a packed project library for easy distribution, and also to prevent linking issues and stuff like that. Package your sequence file, your icon, and your PPL all together in NI Package Manager. And you configure NI Package Manager to put it into the right folder. And then if you put it, again, a note, if you put it into add-ons, it will automatically turn it on. Sometimes this is desirable. In general, it's usually not. So we recommend you put it in just the model plugins folder. So again, lessons learned, use packed project libraries, and deploying the result processing.cfg file is preferable because it'll basically duplicate that configuration that typically happens in the sequence editor onto other machines that receive this result processing plugin.
Questions?
Yeah, questions from people. Thanks for sticking with us. We still got 50 people here. So.
Wait, in our session or just in the GLA summit?
In our session, yeah.
Holy crap. I didn't even think there were 50 people using TestStand in the world.
Yeah. Oliver, thank you so much. You're my bro on the TestStand forums. You and I have collaborated on a lot of answers, so thank you.
Being incepted again.
Kevin's asking, do you provide report plugins to share? We'll send you this one.
You can have this one. We sell them. Wait, actually, we don't have a lot that we sell really. It's usually for customer specific.
Yeah, usually we have customer specific stuff because
we have an Excel one.
Their particular database.
Yeah,
things like
it's
that.
their needs.
Yeah.
We have an Excel one that we use on a lot of different projects.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually going to create one that will call into. Maybe I should keep this a secret.
Nah. People like juicy secrets. Come on.
Okay. So we're actually going to create one that will call into basically LabVIEW classes, and then to create a plugin in TestStand, you don't even have to know TestStand. You just override some
methods in this parent class that we're designing. Yeah.
In the LabVIEW parent class, and away it'll work. So.
Yeah. Kevin says that'd be so much easier. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's why we're doing it.
Yep.
So we'll let you know when that's out.
Yeah, but if you want this example one that we made, just reach out and we'll be happy to send it your way, just so you can have another example to look at beyond just the shipping ones with NI.
Yeah. The LabVIEW quiz is starting soon.
What is the LabVIEW?
I don't know, but it sounds awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
For anyone who wants in an hour, I'm presenting on the 10 Commandments of TestStand. Very controversial because it is 100% my opinion. So feel free to hop on then. See you guys.
All right. Bye, everybody.